Here we go, Treadwell DPT back in with another anatomy breakdown, muscle by muscle. Keep things off with the full quadriceps group. Now it's time to dive into the individuals. Of course, we know our quadriceps femoris consists of 4 muscles. Quadriceps literally means 4 heads, so with that said, the first muscle of this 4-headed monster, we've got the rectus femoris. Some might say this is the star of the show. The only one of the 4 quad muscles that crosses both the hip and the knee, and one that's really earned its rectus name. Rectus meaning straight. This one runs straight down the front of the thigh. It's superficial, it's super powerful, and it's doing double duty. Let's take the time to break it down. We've got origin, insertion, innervation, action, and of course a few clinical tidbits. Our rectus femoris has that dual origin, originating from 2 heads. After the straight head, which comes off of that anterior inferior iliac spine, or AIIS, and we've got our reflected head, which comes from a groove just above the acetabulum of the pelvis. The acetabulum is that socket joint that the head of the femur sits in. Let's quickly look at that AIIS, that anterior inferior iliac spine. Called the anterior inferior iliac spine because it's inferior to the anterior superior iliac spine. Both important landmarks that we like to keep in mind for sure. Both interact with a number of soft tissue structures that we'll be talking about as we progress through the series. So from that AIIS and from that superior acetabular area, our rectus femoris runs straight down the front of the thigh and converges into the quadriceps tendon, which envelops the patella and continues as the patellar ligament to insert onto the tibial tuberosity. That origin to insertion run is very important, and it's what allows muscle to act across both the hip and the knee. We've alluded to it already. Our rectus femoris is a dual joint muscle. That's where the rectus femoris sets itself apart from the rest of the quad muscles. Its activation is highly sensitive to joint positioning. Like its 3 partners, it's a powerful knee extensor, of course, generating that torque to straighten the leg. But unlike those other muscles, it also flexes the hip, working alongside the iliopsoas to lift that thigh forward. That combination is critical for actions like sprinting, kicking, and climbing stairs. Any movement that demands hip flexion and knee extension in sync, you can expect that rectus femoris to be involved. There's some really good research that suggests that moderate hip flexion, so around 30 to 40 degrees, produces the greatest proximal and mid-belly rectus femoris activation during knee extension tasks. Mitsuya et al. Used MRI imaging to show us that setting the hip around 40 degrees of flexion during our knee extensions significantly increased rectus femoris activation compared to those deeper flexion positions like 80 or 90 degrees. Follow-up studies by that same group in 2025 confirmed those findings, highlighting that proximal rectus femoris stiffness, which is a good measure of tension and activation, was highest when the hip was extended or very slightly flexed, so 0 to 40 degrees. Also when the knee was held near 30 degrees flexion. Interestingly, EMG signals within the muscle remained relatively uniform during that study, highlighting that recruitment patterns can shift a little bit within different regions of the rectus femoris based on posture. To all of those prior points, other high-level studies show that single joint knee extension exercises consistently produced greater rectus femoris activity in those multi-joint movements like the leg press. That finding is likely because that added hip extension torque in our compound lifts reduces rectus femoris demand. Taken together, the evidence suggests that the best way to bias rectus femoris is through seated or slightly reclined extensions performed with hip flexion around 30 to 40 degrees and knee positions approaching extension. And that allows the muscle to generate high activity without competing demands from the hip extensors on the other side. We won't over-explain the innervation here. Our rectus femoris is going to be innervated by the femoral nerve L2, L3, L4. the same nerve powering the rest of the quadriceps, as well as the majority of the anterior thigh musculature. So just to reiterate, rectus femoris is innervated by the femoral nerve, roots L2, L3, and L4. We'll briefly talk about a very PT, exercise, science-y specific topic. We've got active and passive insufficiency. Because our rectus femoris crosses two joints, it's especially prone to what is known as passive insufficiency as well as active insufficiency. We'll talk about that passive insufficiency to start. Passive insufficiency in this context is an inability of that rectus femoris to reach forward motion in both joints simultaneously due to that muscle being stretched to its max. Imagine we've got two doors facing each other and they open out different ways. And imagine you've got a string tied on both doorknobs. If both doorknobs open up and move really far apart at the same time, that string gets pulled so tight that it can't stretch any further. To add on, if one door is pulled all the way out, there's not enough slack in that string to move the other door. Held at that maximally stretched position, even if you tug on that string, nothing can happen. It's already maxed out. That's why you'll notice rectus femoris is more effective as a knee extensor when the hip is extended, and it's effective as a hip flexor when the knee is flexed. In both those scenarios, we've got enough slack in that string at one of those ends, or one of those joint ends, to allow for a full movement on the opposite side. Now, sort of the opposite concept, the rectus femoris is a weaker hip flexor when the knee is extended because it's contracting and already in that short position. So to that point, rectus femoris is a very good example here of active insufficiency as well. Same thing, the rectus femoris when the hip is flexed is not as good at knee extension. It's already in that shortened, contracted position and is actively insufficient on that other end of the joint. So say you've got a rubber band pulled between your fingers. If you let go of one side, it snaps or shortens the other way. If you scrunch your fingers super close together, shortening both sides of the rubber band, that rubber band is put in a position from which it can't produce that same elastic force either way. So to further that point, if you let go of both sides simultaneously from that dual shortened position, nothing really happens. Not nearly as powerful of a reaction as if you had just done a release from one side. So same idea with muscles that cross two joints. If they get too short because both joints are moved in the direction the muscle works, they lose their power. That's active insufficiency. So consider that when we extend the knee or in seated, we're in those very flexed hip positions. We're primarily relying on those other quad muscles because our rectus femoris is actively shortened there. So to quickly reiterate those two concepts, passive insufficiency happens when a muscle that crosses two joints is stretched so far over both that it can't lengthen anymore, and it limits your motion. It's a range of motion limitation. Active insufficiency happens when a muscle that crosses two joints gets so short that it can't contract effectively. It's a contractile limitation due to a mechanical disadvantage. All in all, just calls back to that length-tension relationship. Muscles generate the most force and allow the most motion when they're near their optimal resting length. Too long and they can't allow further motion, that's passive insufficiency. Too short and they lose their contractile power, that's our active insufficiency. When we talk about optimizing recruitment and growth of a two-joint muscle like the rectus femoris, joint position isn't just a minor detail, it's a major variable. So we'll talk about that optimal resting rectus 40-degree angle one more time. A very recent study had subjects training knee extension with 2 different hip positions. One leg at 40-degree hip flexion, the other at 90-degree hip flexion. After 10 weeks, rectus femoris hypertrophy was much greater in that 40-degree group, both proximally and distally, while the vastus lateralis showed no meaningful difference between positions. Speaking to that length-tension relationship here as well, so if you're planning to work the rectus femoris specifically, maybe you're rehabbing an injury or something, definitely keep all that in mind. Lean back a little bit in that knee extension machine and get some more help from your rectus. And that's another one. That's the rectus femoris for you, the biarticular dual action workhorse of that quadriceps group. Really a very cool, important concept. Definitely beneficial to consider the length-tension relationship with our muscles, especially those dual joint muscles, where we'll have to consider active and passive insufficiency. Hey, hope you enjoyed it, man. Continue our quad series over these next few weeks. We've got 1 down, we've got 3 to go. Much more in store, even more to come. Really do appreciate all y'all, man. Stay tuned, stay locked. Treadwell DPT. I'll catch you next time.